bloodied battlefields, shattered tribes, and a Roman historian's astonishing charge. Pliny the Elder condemned Julius Caesar's Gallic conquests as inuria humani generis, crimes against humanity. In what may be the earliest recorded indictment of near-genocidal warfare, Caesar's celebrated triumphs stood arraigned by one of Rome's own for their staggering toll. By modern estimates, over 1 million Gauls perished between 58 and 51 BCE, with hundreds of thousands more sold into slavery, out of a population of roughly 5 to 10 million. How did Caesar, hailed in Rome as a brilliant commander and newly appointed proconsul, wage a campaign so brutal that even his compatriots recoiled? Some, including Marcus Porcius Cato the Younger, allegedly sought to prosecute him for the slaughter in Gaul. Yet Caesar's version, preserved in his Commentari de Bello Gallico, frames each engagement as a defense of Roman interests, written in the third person to showcase both discipline and necessity. This tension between Caesar's careful self-portrayal and Pliny's stark moral condemnation offers an unsettling glimpse into the nature of Roman power. To unravel this conflict, we step back to the war's origins and the crisis that first drew Caesar deep into the heart of Gaul.
Did you know that most people who watch our documentaries aren't subscribed yet? If you enjoy animated maps and history, join our community. Leave a like and subscribe so you never miss the next episodes.
By the late 50s BCE, Rome was riven by internal strife. Elite factions vied for dominance in the Senate, while social pressures festered among the populace. In this tense atmosphere, Gaius Julius Caesar, Gnaeus Pompeius Magnus, Pompey, and Marcus Licinius Crassus forged the first triumvirate around 60 BCE, an unofficial pact that allowed each man to strengthen his position and outmaneuver political rivals. Caesar, having served as consul in 59 BCE and holding the crucial office of Pontifex Maximus since 63 BCE, gained a proconsul command over Cisalpine Gaul, Transalpine Gaul, and later Illyricum. His role as Pontifex Maximus bolstered his moral and religious standing in Rome, adding weight to every political move. Initially set for 5 years, Caesar's governmentship was extended by legislation, enabling him to expand Roman territory and send spoils and prestige back to Rome. Pompey, lauded for his eastern conquests, formally controlled Hispania, but managed affairs largely from the capital. He yearned for recognition of his veterans and his eastern treaties, leveraging the triumvirate's backing in the Senate. Crassus, deemed Rome's wealthiest citizen, sought lucrative campaigns in Syria, aiming for both military glory and legal reforms, favoring his vast business network. By the mid-1st century BCE, the Romans referred to Cisalpine Gaul as Gallia Togata, toga-wearing Gaul. Thanks to decades of contact and gradual incorporation, the region north of the Italian peninsula had adopted many Roman customs. Its inhabitants spoke Latin widely, wore Roman-style clothing, and even held partial rights akin to Roman citizens. In contrast, Gallia Comata, long-haired Gaul, extended from the Rhone to the Atlantic, and from the Pyrenees up to the Rhine. Despite Rome's growing ambitions, no direct Roman authority existed there. Local tribes governed themselves, each with distinct leadership and shifting alliances. Among these tribes were the Aedui, Helvetii, Arverni, and Belgae, led by consuls or influential chieftains. Celtic religion, central to their identity, was frequently guided by druids, figures believed to interpret divine will and maintain sacred groves. In some rituals, human sacrifice played a role, though practices varied by region. Culturally, people in Gallia Comata wore Bibracte trousers, favored bold woolen fabrics, and kept the long hair that gave the region its Roman epithet. While Roman merchants and diplomats occasionally ventured into Gallia Comata, it remained an autonomous world, culturally vibrant, politically fragmented, and outside the sphere of Gallia Togata, where Rome's influence was firmly established. In 58 BCE, a movement of staggering scale disrupted the heart of Gaul. The Helvetii, a Celtic tribe from what is now Switzerland, embarked on a mass migration westward in search of more fertile lands. According to Caesar's Commentarii de Bello Gallico 1.5, they burned 12 of their oppida, fortified towns, and about 400 villages before departing, ensuring no possibility of return. Joined by associated groups, Talingi, Latobrigi, Rorici, and some Boii, their numbers are recorded as reaching 368,000 individuals, with 92,000 capable of bearing arms. This drastic act of self-destruction underscored the determination to find a new homeland and place them on an inevitable collision course with Rome's interests in the region. Among those alarmed by the Helveti's route were the Aedui, longtime allies of Rome. Their leading druid and statesman, Divi Shacus, appealed directly to Caesar, arguing that Helvetian movements threatened Aeduan territory. Newly established in his proconsulship, Caesar seized upon this plea. While he framed Rome's involvement as a defensive measure to protect an ally, he also recognized that defeating the Helvetii could yield swift military glory and enduring political capital. Before any major confrontation, Helvetian envoys sought safe passage through the Roman province. They vowed not to harm allied communities if allowed free transit. Caesar, however, delayed formal negotiations and quietly fortified strategic points along their path, signaling he had little intention of granting the request. Once the Aedui, under Divi Shacus, reiterated their call for protection, Caesar found both the casus belli and the moral pretext he needed to act decisively. The first notable clash occurred at the Arar River, modern Saône. As large contingents of the Helvetii were midway across with families and supplies, Caesar's legions launched a sudden ambush. Although this engagement was smaller than the battles that would follow, it carried potent symbolism. Rome's strict discipline and tactical prowess caught the Helvetii in a vulnerable moment. Caesar himself lauded this rapid success as proof of Roman superiority, noting thousands of Helvetian casualties. Despite the loss, the Helvetii refused to abandon their quest, regrouping and continuing their westward march. Meanwhile, Caesar, emboldened by the Arar victory, advanced with growing confidence. What began as cautious negotiations had escalated into open conflict, foreshadowing the far costlier struggles soon to engulf much of Gaul. The ambush at the Arar was but the first link in a chain of confrontations, its sudden violence hinting at the brutal consequences Roman legions would soon deliver, culminating in the decisive clash at Bibracte. By midsummer 58 BCE, tension with the Helvetii reached a breaking point near Bibracte, a major stronghold of the Aedui. The Romans labeled large fortified Celtic hill forts like this as oppida, while the Helvetii, carrying an estimated 80,000 or more, including families, sought to push on. Opposing them stood 6 Roman legions, around 30,000 men, under Caesar's command, determined to force a decisive engagement. Caesar's maneuvers had cut off the Helveti's supply lines, leaving them little choice but to stand and fight. On the chosen ground near Bibracte, both sides drew up a ferocious clash, likely contained to one day of intense combat, typical of ancient pitched battles. The Helvetii, hardened by their migration, stood resolute, yet the Romans' disciplined formations, combined with javelin volleys called pila, followed by close-quarters sword fighting, steadily wore them down. Contemporary accounts differ on exact figures, but ancient sources and modern estimates suggest thousands of Helvetii were killed or captured in this encounter alone. In the final moments, Roman resoluteness prevailed, leaving the Helvetii shattered and pushing the survivors into surrender or escape. As Caesar later wrote, they bravely resisted at first, forming a single mass, yet once burdened by the legionaries' onslaught and pelted by javelins from every side, they broke ranks and fled in great disorder. A vast number perished, and the road was strewn with bodies and abandoned wagons. That stark description encapsulates the intensity of Bibracte. The Helveti's defeat, among the earliest major clashes of Caesar's Gallic wars, demonstrated the sheer potency of Roman discipline and set the stage for further conquests, as Gaul would soon learn how swiftly and decisively Caesar's legions moved to secure victory. Following the clash at Bibracte, the Helvetii, their migration effectively shattered, were compelled by Caesar to return to their original territories and rebuild the towns and villages they had burned. This policy aimed to prevent the region from remaining a deserted wasteland, which could invite Germanic incursions. To ensure the displaced Helvetii did not starve or spark further unrest as they retraced their steps, Caesar commanded the Eburones to supply them with abundant grain and other essentials. While the Aedui and other allied tribes also had responsibilities, such as maintaining security and providing certain resources, there is no direct evidence that Caesar ordered the Aedui to participate in the physical reconstruction of Helvetian settlements. This arrangement still showcased Caesar's tight control over local affairs. By directing both Helveti's actions and the support from allied peoples, he aimed to avert renewed conflict and reinforce Rome's authority throughout the region. For many tribes, the sight of the Helvetii trudging back to scorched homelands under Roman decree was sobering. Word of Rome's swift, decisive victory and Caesar's ability to impose terms on both friend and foe spread swiftly. While the Aedui remained nominally friends of Rome, led in diplomacy by Divi Shacus, some among them chafed at demands that cost grain and effort. Beneath the surface, doubts brewed over how deep Caesar's influence would run. Meanwhile, Caesar broadened his administrative measures across central Gaul. His legions built roads, secured winter quarters, and enforced tribute collection, offering stability but also signaling Rome's grip tightening. Tribes once relieved at Helvetian defeat grew wary that the price of Roman protection was submission to a growing empire. With the Helvetii neutralized and the Aedui bound to Rome's will, Caesar had secured the central battleground of Gaul. Yet behind every Roman road and winter camp stood rising doubts among the tribes, uncertainty that would soon brew into larger conflict. By 57 BCE, murmurs of resistance in the north signaled Caesar's next challenge, the Belgic War. It is early 57 BCE. The shock of Caesar's triumph over the Helvetii still echoes across Gaul, unsettling every tribal chieftain. Uneasy leaders, some bearing tribute, seek Rome's goodwill in an effort to avoid a fate like that of the Helvetii. Yet, on the northern horizon, ominous rumors spread of a fierce Belgic alliance preparing to resist Rome's growing presence. Another collision of armies looms, and all of Gaul braces for the next phase of Caesar's relentless campaign. In the wake of Caesar's victory, the Helvetii were compelled to return to their original valleys, effectively turning them into a buffer between Roman-held territory and the Germanic tribes to the north. Within his Commentary de Bello Gallico, Caesar depicts himself almost as an arbiter of regional geopolitics. The verbs he employs, usit imperavit, ordered, commanded, reveal a level of authority that, at least outwardly, the Gauls appeared to accept. Buoyed by his successful campaign, Caesar found various Gallic peoples dispatching envoys to pay respects and request permission for a grand general assembly. The Gauls hoped this gathering might resolve long-standing rivalries, especially those that had drawn in foreign allies like the Germanic Suebi. Even so, the atmosphere was tinged with wariness. As Caesar solidified his hold on central Gaul, many chieftains recognized that Rome's looming power, while promising security, could just as easily become the engine of a new wave of conquest. Caesar, acceding to these requests, set both date and location for the meeting. According to the account, the formal goal was to mitigate the rivalries that had driven some tribes to seek support from the Suebi, Germanic warriors, who, once admitted into Gaul, had not left. Caesar's influence thus extended to Gallic internal diplomacy as well. He wanted to understand the relationships among the various nations. To contain further disruption, and simultaneously to consolidate his position as the defender or ruler of an ever-expanding territory. Central to Gallic concerns was the Germanic king Ariovistus, leader of the Suebi, who had long occupied eastern Gaul, levying tribute, taking hostages, and bolstering his power among local tribes. According to Caesar's own commentary, multiple Gallic allies, notably the Aedui, grievously complained of Ariovistus' growing menace, pleading for Roman intervention. Sensing both moral pretext and strategic gain, Caesar dispatched a series of embassies, demanding that Ariovistus return hostages and exacting tributes. Ariovistus, previously acknowledged by the Roman Senate for certain prior alliances, rejected Caesar's sudden interference. In his view, the lands he controlled had been rightfully conquered. Rome had no business meddling there. The discussions quickly degenerated, ending in stone and arrow throwing. With negotiations shattered, Caesar advanced with roughly 6 legions, totaling 30,000 to 35,000 soldiers, forcing Ariovistus into open confrontation. The ensuing battle proved ferocious. Ariovistus reportedly fielded 15,000 to 20,000 Germanic warriors. Some accounts suggest even more, gathered behind wagon barricades filled with their families. Despite the Germans' desperate resistance, Caesar's disciplined legionaries prevailed, driving a chaotic rout. Many Suebi perished while fleeing toward the Rhine. Survivors, including women and children, faced capture or enslavement. Sources refer to a true slaughter, suggesting thousands of fatalities. Ariovistus himself disappeared in the pandemonium, and his family shared the grim fate of his warriors, massacred or taken captive. In classic Caesar style, the commentary depicted this victory as a righteous move to safeguard allies, yet the sheer scale of the dead, wounded, and enslaved revealed a far more ruthless objective: securing permanent Roman dominance. By stationing his legions to winter beyond Rome's traditional frontiers, Caesar left little doubt that this wasn't merely a brief intervention. It was the foundation of a lasting conquest built on discipline, fear, and a methodical extension of Roman power. The second year of Caesar's campaign, 57 BCE, saw the action shift decisively north. According to his own Commentari de Bello Gallico, Book 2, Caesar learned that the Belgic tribes, alarmed by Rome's swift subjugation of central Gaul, had formed a large coalition. Caesar claims they could field up to 288,000 warriors in total. Recognizing the looming threat, he swiftly advanced with an expanded force of 8 legions, roughly 45,000 men by modern estimates, a move he admits was undertaken without explicit Senate authorization. Caesar details multiple major engagements, naming tribes like the Nervi, Morini, and Atrebates among those he crushed. Using Rome's trademark siege warfare, engineered ramparts, siege towers, and disciplined infantry, Caesar dismantled fortified Belgic strongholds, often referred to as oppida. Despite the Belgae's considerable numbers, Caesar's rigorous tactics and cohesive leadership proved decisive. The final holdout was the Attuatoci, entrenched behind steep cliffs on 3 sides and fortified by double walls on the 4th. Caesar's legions constructed a large siege tower, prompting the defenders to mock the Little Romans for daring to move such a cumbersome machine. But once the tower advanced, the Attuatoci requested peace, surrendering what they claimed were all their weapons. Caesar, suspecting deceit, maintained tight vigilance. When the Attuatoci launched a sudden night attack, hoping the legions were off guard, they were repelled, leading to a thorough Roman victory. With resistance shattered, Caesar reports that he sold 53,000 prisoners into slavery, an act underlying both the ferocity of the campaign and the extent of Rome's dominance. By the year's end, the Belgae were largely subdued. Caesar withdrew to Italy to address pressing political affairs, leaving behind legions firmly established in Belgic territory. Although Caesar emphasized the scale of the enemy, 288,000, and Rome's discipline, Modern scholars note that his figures may be inflated, serving to magnify Rome's triumph and the aura of his leadership. Nonetheless, the conquest of the Belgae demonstrated Caesar's blend of engineering prowess, relentless offense, and harsh reprisals, methods that would soon echo in his continuing campaigns across Gaul. By early 56 BCE, Rome was sliding into chaos. Pompey and Crassus, the other two members of the first Triumvirate, often clashed more than they cooperated. Their divergence left space for street factions to battle openly, undermining the political and economic reforms Caesar had introduced. Far away in Gaul, Caesar worried these achievements could be overturned by hostile senators if his allies failed to maintain order. Seeking to salvage their alliance, Caesar summoned a conference in April 56 BCE, held in Lucca in northern Italy. There, he forced a renewed accord. Pompey and Crassus would serve as joint consuls in 55 BCE. Upon finishing their consulship, Pompey would govern Hispania, Crassus would take Syria, and Caesar's own proconsulship in Gaul and Illyricum would extend for another 5 years. This arrangement guaranteed that his reforms and the power base they supported would not be casually dismantled in his absence. With the pact reaffirmed and his allies stabilized, Caesar returned north to address growing crises in Gaul, relieved that his position at home appeared secure, even as Rome itself remained on the brink of new unrest. No sooner had Caesar returned from the Conference of Lucca than he faced new uprisings across northwestern Gaul. Realizing many tribes now grasped his intent, lasting Roman occupation rather than mere protection, he acted swiftly, splitting his forces for multiple operations. In the spring of 56 BCE, Caesar dispatched Titus Labienus and a single legion, roughly 5,000 Roman infantry, along with auxiliary cavalry to secure the Rhine frontier. Ever mindful of a possible Germanic incursion, Caesar feared that Suebi warriors, potentially several thousand, might cross the river and bolster any Gallic rebels. Labienus' mission was clear: hold the line against would-be allies from beyond the Rhine, ensuring Rome's growing grip on Gaul remained unchallenged in the east. Meanwhile, in the north, Caesar deployed 2 additional legions, around 10,000 Roman troops, to confront the Morini and the Menapii, Belgic offshoots adamantly opposed to Roman rule. Ancient accounts suggest these tribes could rally some 15,000 to 20,000 warriors, scattered in small hamlets across dense woodlands. Using quick strikes and ambushes, the Morini and Menapii repeatedly harassed Roman foragers, threatening the army's vital supply routes. By targeting these rebellious pockets, Caesar aimed to eliminate northern resistance before it could gain momentum, and thus ensure that Rome's expanding footprint remained secure on every front. Simultaneously, Publius Licinius Crassus, commanding 2 legions, about 10,000 men, headed into southwestern Gaul. There, various Aquitanian tribes, loosely capable of fielding some 20,000 warriors, had aligned with roving Germanic bands and begun raiding Rome's allies. According to Caesar, these confederations tested Roman resolve, hoping that distance from Caesar's main force would grant them an advantage. Crassus's mission was to crush such alliances and affirm Rome's authority in the region, ensuring the southwest would not turn into a safe haven for further revolt. Caesar personally retained the remaining 2 legions, circa 10,000 infantry, plus support units, to tackle the Veneti, a maritime people allegedly detaining Roman envoys. Skilled sailors and capable of fielding thousands of shipborne fighters, the Veneti dominated trade routes off Brittany. Building a fleet on the Loire, Caesar clashed with the Veneti near the Gulf of Morbihan. While the exact number of Roman ships remains uncertain, Caesar had constructed a fleet specifically to counter the powerful Veneti navy, which fielded approximately 220 ships. Despite facing large Gallic vessels adapted to surging Atlantic tides, manned by an estimated 4,000 to 5,000 Veneti sailors, Roman engineering and discipline prevailed. Caesar's men employed special hooks to cut enemy rigging, neutralizing their naval advantage. This tactic allowed the Romans to board and capture or destroy nearly the entire Veneti fleet. Once victorious, Caesar imposed a fierce reprisal. Tribal elders were executed, and surviving Veneti, reaching thousands, were sold into slavery. Thus ended 56 BCE with a stark demonstration of Roman naval ingenuity and a clear warning that Rome's authority would be enforced at any cost. By the close of that year, Caesar had stretched his legions across Gaul, securing the Rhine frontier, rooting out northern dissent, and crushing southwestern alliances. Yet a greater reckoning loomed just beyond the horizon, as rumors of fresh Germanic movements hinted at one of the bloodiest campaigns in Roman memory. Caesar's appetite for conquest showed no sign of waning. His subsequent actions would shock even those accustomed to his relentless drive. In the summer of 55 BCE, a feat stuns the continent. Roman legionaries, under Julius Caesar's command, build a wooden bridge across the Rhine in just 10 days. Over 500 meters long, 4 meters wide, and supported by 56 piers. It has been studied and admired for centuries, proof that no barrier can halt Rome's ambition. Why this construction, and how did Caesar gain such power in Gaul? Retrace the steps leading here and discover the events destined to spark even greater upheaval. By the close of 56 BCE, Caesar's grip on Gaul has tightened. Fresh from triumphs against various tribes, he stations his legions in winter quarters across central and northern territories. Roads are improved, supply lines secured, and new garrisons established. Yet this outward show of stability masks a growing undercurrent of discontent. Many Gallic communities chafe under Roman demands for tribute, fearing impoverishment if they fail to deliver grain and gold on schedule. Others resent the constant billeting of troops, which strains local resources and erodes traditional power structures. Quiet disapproval simmers in tribal assemblies, where chieftains debate whether appeasing Rome is truly less dangerous than open defiance. For Caesar, these months demand a delicate balance. He must maintain Roman order through efficient administration and targeted displays of force, all while preventing resentful tribes from forging coalitions that could threaten his carefully built foothold in Gaul. Alarming reports spread that two Germanic tribes, the Tincteri and the Usipeti, had crossed the Rhine and were roaming Gaul in search of land. Determined to end these incursions, Caesar advanced with 8 legions, about 40,000 to 45,000 infantry, to confront them. At first, the tribes sued for peace, but skirmishes soon erupted. Caesar accused them of violating a truce and unleashed a devastating attack on their camp. Ancient sources claim up to 400,000 Tincteri and Usipeti, men, women, and children, were killed or captured. The horror of this slaughter sparked outrage in Rome, where some demanded Caesar's punishment. Marcus Porcius Cato, in particular, insisted that Caesar be handed over to the barbarians so Rome could purge itself of guilt for breaking the truce. Fresh from this grim episode, Caesar resolved to send a message that no frontier could protect Rome's adversaries. Near the confluence of the Rhine and the Moselle, close to modern Koblenz, he ordered his engineers to construct a wooden bridge in only 10 days, enabling his legions to march east of the river. Once across, Caesar briefly ravaged local settlements, forged short-term alliances to keep the Germanic tribes on edge, and then withdrew. Convinced his display of power had served its purpose, he dismantled the bridge, leaving behind a stark warning that Rome could reach any foe at will. Only weeks after dismantling his wooden bridge over the Rhine, Caesar pursued another bold endeavor, an incursion into Britain. Officially, he aimed to intercept any aid the islanders might provide to rebellious Gauls. Yet, in his Commentari de Bello Gallico, Caesar himself highlights a deeper motive. He longed, quote, to see what sort of people inhabited that island, to learn of their lands, harbors, and approaches, all unknown matters. The timing was hardly ideal. It was late summer, winter loomed, and Caesar brought just 2 legions, around 10,000 men, from Portus Itius, modern Boulogne. Similar to a curious Odysseus venturing into the land of the Cyclops, Caesar embarked on a campaign that proved both perilous and sensational. The Romans faced storm-tossed landings, fierce resistance from inhabitants said to dye themselves blue, and rumors of shared wives among their tribes. Though Caesar won a few minor skirmishes and secured informal agreements with some local chieftains, his position remained precarious. He soon withdrew, framing the expedition as a diplomatic triumph. Yet its resonance across Rome was immense. For the first time, a Roman force had crossed the Western Ocean and sailed the Atlantic, sealing Caesar's reputation as a commander willing to push the empire's boundaries to their utmost limits. Before embarking on his second venture to Britain, Caesar confronted deepening resentments in Gaul. Determined to stifle potential uprisings, he commanded several Gallic nobles to join him, among them Dumnorige, whose brother Diviciacus had once supported Rome. Dumnorige refused outright, circulating rumors that Caesar aimed to lure Gallic leaders away only to have them discreetly executed. In an act of overt defiance, he left the Roman camp. Caesar swiftly ordered him seized or killed if he resisted. Cornered, Dumnorige implored his men to remain loyal, crying, "I am a free man of a free people," before he was slain. This episode laid bare the growing hostility festering under Roman rule, a tension soon to reverberate beyond Gaul. Despite such unrest, Caesar pressed ahead. He resolved to surpass his initial British foray, where storms and meager numbers had curtailed any lasting success. According to his own Commentari de Bello Gallico, Book 5, and other ancient sources, he commissioned a large-scale shipbuilding effort. Caesar claims around 600 new transport vessels, supplemented by 28 specialized warships, each with a shallower draft than standard Roman galleys. This innovation aimed to address the treacherous coastal landings that had plagued his first expedition, offering greater stability when beaching on the island's open shores. Leading 5 legions, some 25,000 infantry, plus cavalry across the channel, Caesar hoped to thrust deeper into southeastern Britain. He confronted fierce tribal coalitions under Cassivellaunus, who excelled in chariot warfare. Yet storms again battered his fleet, making supplies difficult to land and protect. While local chieftains yielded hostages and pledged tribute, no permanent occupation materialized. Winter approached, forcing Caesar to withdraw. He returned to Gaul with elevated prestige and the knowledge that he could project power overseas. Though Dumnorige's rebellion hinted at much broader discontent, ready to explode should Caesar's focus waver. Fresh from his British campaigns, Caesar nonetheless returned to a Gaul simmering with discontent. He chose to scatter his legions across various northeastern territories for winter, hoping that smaller garrisons would keep potential rebels in check. Yet local leaders, wary of Roman requisitions and forced billeting, quietly resented this continued presence. Around the same time, Caesar suffered a devastating personal loss. His daughter Julia, married to Pompey as part of the Triumvirate pact, died in childbirth. Although Pompey remained formally allied to Caesar and even sent 2 legions to replace recent losses, the familial bond uniting them was severed forever. Back in Gaul, the greatest danger lay among the Eburones, led by the cunning Ambiorix. One Roman legion, about 5,000 men, under Quintus Titurius Sabinus and Lucius Aurunculeius Cotta, made camp in Eburones territory. Ambiorix approached them with false promises of safe passage, claiming a looming Germanic threat nearby. Trusting his word, Sabinus and Cotta broke camp, only to be ambushed in a narrow valley. Almost the entire legion was massacred. The two commanders themselves perished in the chaos. Emboldened by Ambrioric's success, neighboring tribes like the Nervi attempted similar raids on other isolated Roman outposts. Alarmed, Caesar raced to relieve a besieged fort held by Quintus Tullius Cicero, narrowly preventing another disaster. In the aftermath, Rome's grip on Gaul appeared more fragile than ever, and the winter encampments, meant to maintain order, had become a lethal vulnerability. Meanwhile, the death of Julia eroded Caesar's political stability. Although Pompey remained outwardly supportive, sending those extra legions, cracks were forming in the Triumvirate. By 53 BCE, nearly all Gallic tribes, except the Aedui and Remi, would join in a wider revolt, signaling that Caesar's victories had done little to quell Gallic resentment. With Gaul smoldering from the previous winter's turmoil, Caesar mounted a relentless counteroffensive in 53 BCE. His first targets were the Nervi, Carnudi, and the Senones, all of whom had shown varying degrees of defiance. Faced with the devastation of their fields and settlements, these tribes quickly surrendered, preferring capitulation over ruin. Caesar next marched against the Menapii, who likewise posed a risk along the northern frontier. Only after subduing these pockets of resistance did he consolidate 8 or 9 legions, roughly 35,000 to 40,000 men, to exact severe vengeance on the Eburones, considered prime instigators of the latest revolt. Rather than engaging in prolonged chases through wetlands, Caesar invited neighboring tribes to hunt down the scattered Eburones in exchange for whatever plunder they could seize. The Eburones fled into inaccessible marshes, yet most were hunted down or perished from hunger. Their leader, Ambiorix, managed to elude capture, vanishing into the wilderness and symbolizing the last spark of resistance in the region. Caesar's message to all Gaul was unambiguous. Any tribe daring to challenge Rome would face utter devastation. Satisfied he had quelled immediate threats, Caesar once again turned to the Rhine. He constructed a second wooden bridge, another demonstration of Roman engineering, to cross the river, hoping to discourage Germanic tribes from aiding any future Gallic uprisings. This brief campaign east of the Rhine involved minimal direct clashes. Most Germanic groups kept their distance, mindful of Caesar's ruthless reputation. Soon, he dismantled the bridge, having reasserted Rome's supremacy beyond the river. Even as Caesar solidified his military grip on Gaul, events far from its borders reshaped his political standing. Marcus Licinius Crassus, his ally in the First Triumvirate, sought glory in Syria but met disaster in Carrhae, where he was defeated and killed by the Parthians. With Crassus gone, the Triumvirate effectively collapsed. In Rome, Caesar's enemies seized the opportunity to undermine his position, and Pompey, now widowed after Julia's death, drifted closer to the aristocratic faction in the Senate. In 52 BCE, Caesar's staunch supporter, Publio Clodio Pulchro Clodius, was slain in a street brawl, robbing him of a crucial ally in the capital. Amid these upheavals, Caesar remained in Gaul, still sending wealth and slaves back to Rome in an attempt to preserve his influence. Senators hostile to his growing power accused him of waging a personal war without proper oversight, and they feared he might soon challenge the Republic itself. Meanwhile, across central Gaul, dissent smoldered. Vercingetorix, an Arvernian noble, quietly forged alliances among the increasingly resentful tribes. Caesar's brutal tactics had sown fear but also kindled a fierce defiance, one about to burst into the largest, most coordinated revolt he would face. Unaware of just how perilous the situation would become, Caesar advanced confidently into what would soon be the defining challenge of his Gallic campaigns. By late 53 BCE, Caesar had consolidated power in Gaul, launched 2 expeditions to Britain and crushed the Eburones. His ruthless methods have instilled fear, yet also fueled anger. On the horizon, a massive rebellion awaits, with Vercingetorix poised to unify Gaul in a final stand. In early 52 BCE, Gaul stands on the brink of its greatest uprising yet. Rising from the heart of Arvernia is Vercingetorix, a charismatic noble uniting fractious tribes under one banner to expel Roman rule. Meanwhile, Caesar's legions, powerful but overextended, strain to maintain control while politics in Rome threaten to pull him away. The stage is set for a decisive confrontation that will determine Gaul's destiny, one in which Caesar's seemingly unstoppable ambition meets the fierce determination of a newly united enemy. In the sacred forests, rich with magical significance, Gallic chieftains gather to plan a sweeping revolt. They know Caesar, distracted by tensions in Italy, may not be able to rejoin his army in time. These leaders recall the suffering Rome has inflicted upon all of Gaul, oppressive tributes, mass enslavements, and the loss of cherished freedoms. Convinced that now is the moment to strike, the Carnudi ignite hostilities by killing every Roman merchant in their capital, Cenabo. News of this violent act spreads from grove to grove, reaching the heartlands of the Averni, where a towering figure emerges. That figure is Vercingetorix, son of Celtillus, a one-time supreme leader of Gaul who was executed by his own people. Vercingetorix, whose name likely means Great King of Warriors, swiftly gathers multiple tribes, punishing any who hesitate and forging a disciplined army in a matter of weeks. Exploiting the widespread anger at Caesar's harsh rule, he reignites a pan-Gallic desire for independence. Once divided by old rivalries, the Averni and other tribes find themselves rallying around Vercingetorix's determination and fierce leadership. Thus begins the most formidable challenge Caesar has yet faced, a unified coalition of Gauls bent on reclaiming their lands and their freedom from Roman dominion. With the tribes in open revolt, Vercingetorix insisted on a radical strategy to undermine Caesar's legions, the scorched earth policy. Rather than let the Romans seize valuable crops and shelter, he ordered villages burned, fields razed, and food stocks destroyed. This harsh measure demanded immense sacrifice from local populations. Families watched their homes and livelihoods reduced to ashes. Yet Vercingetorix argued it was preferable to fueling Rome's war machine. Only one major settlement refused, Avaricum, defended by the Bibractes and strategically perched on high ground. Convinced they could withstand a Roman assault, they defied Vercingetorix's orders to abandon and destroy the oppidum. In response, Caesar deployed his standard siege methods: siege towers, ramparts, and well-drilled infantry. The defenders fought valiantly, leveraging the city's natural defenses and fortifications, but Roman discipline proved insurmountable in the end. When Caesar's troops finally breached the walls, they unleashed a horrific slaughter. Of Avaricum's estimated 40,000 inhabitants, a staggering figure comparable to the total civilian casualties on British soil during World War II bombings, fewer than 800 escaped. That grim number reverberated across Gaul, confirming Vercingetorix's warning about Roman ruthlessness. Even though the Bibractes had acted against his advice, their annihilation spurred other tribes to embrace his leadership. The fall of Avaricum demonstrated Caesar's lethal efficiency, but also galvanized Gallic resistance. For every triumph the Romans celebrated, fresh hatred and fear sprang up among the tribes, fueling the fires of a conflict that was only growing more desperate. Buoyed by his success at Avaricum, Caesar set his sights on Gergovia, a formidable hill fort deep in Arvernian territory, Vercingetorix's homeland. Perched on steep slopes and protected by fortified earthworks, Gergovia granted the Gallic defenders a potent positional advantage. Caesar hoped to force Vercingetorix into open combat, but the landscape severely limited Roman maneuvering. Initially, the Aedui, longtime allies of Rome, remained on Caesar's side. Yet amid growing discontent and rumors of Caesar's vulnerability, some Aeduan factions switched allegiance to Vercingetorix. This shift undermined Caesar's supply lines and rattled his confidence as he prepared for a climactic engagement. Attempting to fracture the Gallic forces, Caesar advanced multiple columns toward Gergovia, hoping to feint an attack and force a decisive breakthrough. However, miscommunication and overextension led Roman units too far upslope. Sensing an opportunity, Gallic warriors surged forward, bolstered by Vercingetorix's leadership and the protective terrain. They inflicted severe casualties on the exposed legionaries, forcing Caesar to retreat in disarray. Gergovia thus became Caesar's first clear-cut defeat in Gaul, a jarring testament that even Rome's disciplined legions could falter against the right combination of strategy and geography. Word of Caesar's setback spread rapidly, emboldening more tribes to join Vercingetorix and causing many of Caesar's remaining allies to question Rome's grasp on Gaul. In the aftermath, Vercingetorix's stature soared, proving that with unity and clever tactics, the Gauls could stand against the conqueror. Retreating to Alesia, perched on a plateau in modern-day Burgundy, Vercingetorix readied himself for a decisive stand. Caesar, determined to crush the uprising, arrived with 10 to 12 legions, some estimates exceeding 50,000 infantry, and prepared a brutal strategy of encirclement and starvation. First, he oversaw the construction of a 16-kilometer circumvallation around the hill, isolating Vercingetorix's forces. Though Gallic cavalry attempted to disrupt these fortifications, they achieved little. Fearing a massive relief army would soon march to liberate Alesia, Caesar then ordered a 20-kilometer contravallation, girded with elaborate traps to keep external rescuers at bay. In his Commentari de Bello Gallico, Caesar details these fortifications. He felled tree trunks and sharpened them, placing them in pits 5 feet deep. Anyone venturing into these pits would be impaled, and we called these Suebi. In front of them, on slanting lines, we dug holes 3 feet deep, each containing smooth, fire-hardened stakes covered with brush. We arranged 8 rows of these, naming them lilies because of their shape. Ahead of these, we buried iron spikes everywhere, calling them stimuli. The Mandubi inside Alesia soon ran out of food. Their livestock was slaughtered, grain stores emptied, and Caesar suggests that some Gauls even considered feeding on the elderly. Ultimately, Vercingetorix ordered all non-combatants, women, elderly, and children, to leave, hoping to preserve precious rations for his warriors. These desperate civilians descended the hill and pleaded with Caesar for mercy, offering themselves as slaves to avoid starvation. Yet Caesar refused, noting that he had no desire to relieve the strain on Alesia. He wrote, he turned them away, believing that doing so would intensify the defenders' desperation, for he assumed they would have to be readmitted behind the walls. In a tragic turn, the Gallic defenders also refused to readmit their own kin, unwilling or unable to sacrifice the small reserves of food that remained. Caught between the Roman lines and the city's ramparts, these innocent non-combatants languished in a wasteland of hunger and despair. Historians still debate the greater cruelty, that of Vercingetorix and his lieutenants for casting out their people, or of Caesar for condemning them to slow death rather than granting them any form of sanctuary. Caesar himself likely faced shortages in his own army, yet he judged that leaving the civilians to suffer would sap the defenders' resolve. A few weeks into the siege, a long-awaited Gallic relief force, set to total 240,000 infantry and 8,000 cavalry, finally appeared before Alesia. Determined to break the Roman blockade from both inside and out, the reinforcements attacked Caesar's outer fortifications, while Vercingetorix's garrison attempted a simultaneous sortie from atop the plateau. Fighting raged throughout the day, with the Romans defending behind their walls, trenches, and ramparts, straining to repel the converging assaults. A nighttime attack also took place, reportedly involving a young Mark Antony among those who distinguished themselves in repelling the assault. Even so, the Gauls soon discovered a vulnerable northern section of the Roman lines, steep terrain too wide to be perfectly fortified. At midday, 60,000 chosen Gallic warriors launched a decisive strike against this weak point, while Vercingetorix led a fresh offensive from within Alesia. Roman supply lines were stretched thin. Caesar himself noted how rattled his men became when they heard fierce battle behind them, recognizing that their survival depended on another sector's success. The crisis peaked when the Gallic forces bridged ditches, overwhelmed traps, and nearly breached the ramparts. Labienus, commanding that segment, dispatched a desperate plea for support. Caesar personally led 39 cohorts, a third of his army, to that front, donning his distinctive purple cloak. Recognized by the enemy, he instantly became their prime target. Yet in a sudden maneuver, Roman cavalry charged the Gauls from behind, throwing the relief force into utter confusion. Caught between two Roman thrusts, they broke ranks and fled, sustaining heavy casualties in the pursuit. By the following morning, Vercingetorix grasped that continued resistance would only destroy his men. Gathering his surviving warriors, he declared he had fought not for personal gain, but for the freedom of Gaul. Some accounts say he then allowed them to choose whether he should die or be handed to Caesar. Determined to spare more bloodshed, they surrendered him alive. Vercingetorix, clad in full armor, is said to have ridden out and placed his weapons at Caesar's feet. He was imprisoned for 6 years in Rome's Tullianum, Mamertine, and ultimately executed after being paraded in Caesar's triumph. After nearly 8 years from 58 to 51 BCE and an estimated 1 million dead, Caesar finally subdues Gaul. He winters in Bibracte, where his campaign began, stamping out residual uprisings through raids, massacres, and plunder, yet also bestowing titles and privileges on loyal or repentant chieftains. With the region pacified, he cultivates a Roman-aligned aristocracy to secure lasting stability and prosperity. This policy proves effective. Gallo-Roman culture will flourish, as evidenced by monuments still standing in modern France. Yet suspicion grows in Rome, and Caesar's immense power now propels him toward a fateful crossing of the Rubicon and the ensuing civil war. If you enjoyed this deep dive into Caesar's definitive triumph in Gaul and the dawn of a new Roman age, hit the like button, subscribe to our channel, and turn on notifications. Join us next time to explore the fateful crossing of the Rubicon and the civil war that would reshape Rome forever.